we'll talk about stress reduction for the shelter cat, because this is how that cat might feel in that shelter. Stress really can occur in any situation where the animal feels frustrated, anxious, or fearful. Okay? And these are the situations that bring on that stress response. And so we'll talk about frustration first. And I talked about it a little with the dogs as well. But frustration is an emotion. It's usually attributed to external factors that are beyond the animal's control. They can't do anything about it. Or an unfulfilled need or a blocked motivative behavior, like I want to get out of here. And so, as I said with the dogs, animals in the shelter are really, really frustrated a lot. Now, anxiety is a state of apprehension or uncertainty, and it results from anticipation of something that might be threatening or scary. That's what anxiety is all about. And then we have the fear. And fear is an adaptive emotion. And again, it happens whenever an animal perceives a real danger, perceives something that they think is going to be harmful to them. And so those three emotions are often triggered in the shelter environment for cats and dogs. So the frustration, the anxiety, and the fear. And they all bring on the same stress response that I talked about earlier in the dog talk. So again, as I said before, reducing and recognizing and reducing stress in the shelter is the most critical component to the wellness program, because a stressed animal is likely to get sick. And you know that the URI in your cats runs rampant in your shelter mainly because of the stress they're under, in addition to being around other sick cats. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the cat. So the domestic cat is still an excellent, excellent hunter, as you know. And so their senses really are very keen as a hunter. Their auditory sense, again, they can hear in a range that humans can't hear. They can hear up to 80 kilohertz, higher than a dog can hear. And that allows them to hear that high-pitched squeaking of the rodents that they're hunting. Their vision is also quite different than ours. They have excellent night vision. They have a very highly flexible pupil, and they have that light reflecting tapetum. They can see in 1/6 of the illumination of a human. They also have very motion sensitive vision because they have more rods in their eyes than cones. And all of this is to make them good nocturnal hunters. Their sense of smell, again, much more keen than a human sense of smell. We have 5 million scent receptors. The cat has 67 million scent receptors. And smell is very important to cats. And they have these sebaceous glands all over their body that excrete things that communicate to other cats. And also urine and feces are used in olfactory communication with cats as well. So again, that vomeronasal organ is the organ that is used to detect and analyze pheromones. And when a cat does the Flamen response, that's when they're taking that pheromone up into their vomeronasal organ. Cats also have a very sensitive touch sense. So they have these tactile vibrissae on their face and on their forearms that transmit information to them. And this again helps them move around in dim lighting and get their bearings in the dim lighting. And they also have very sensitive foot pads. Their foot pads are extremely sensitive to vibration. Now you put all these senses together in a cat, and you can see why it's an amazing nocturnal hunter. Because they can just sit there and hear the slightest little thing, feel the slightest little movement, see in the dark, and so they're going to catch their prey in that dark. But in addition to being predators, cats are also a prey species. So they're what we call a predator-prey species, and as such, cats are hardwired for flight or fight. Okay, and so they're going to trigger to flight or fight before a dog would trigger to fight or flight, generally speaking. Now, in general, cats would rather avoid a fear-provoking situation because they're experts at both, But if given a chance, they would much rather get away. So flight would be their number one option. But if they can't get away, then they're not going to have a choice but to fight, because that's the only option they have. So a caged cat doesn't really have any options. So even the sweetest cat can be very fractious in a cage because they have no other option. And so you have to be very careful, because you know, like Dr. Weiss was talking about earlier with the cats. You know, we're not talking about feral right now, but the idea that a nice cat can be very aggressive in the shelter. I think she was talking about one of her cats who was terrible in the shelter and went home as a sweetie pie. Okay? When they don't have any other options, they'll trigger to fight. Once provoked, a cat can stay provoked for a very long time. They can stay agitated for up to 24 hours. So you agitate a cat and he wigs out on you in the shelter, in the cage, and you say, whoa, I'm going to give him a little time to settle down. And you go back in 2 hours and you go to touch him again, and he could wig out on you even faster because he's still agitated, and they can stay like that for a really long time. Now, occasionally cats can become completely immobile, and this is that catatonic state where they just kind of freeze. So that's that freeze response. So flight, fight, or freeze. And you know, sometimes those frozen cats, you feel like you can get stuff done with them, but the frozen cat is really kind of just teetering on the edge. You got to be careful with these guys because, again, they're frozen in fear, but they certainly could trigger if you do something to them that they don't particularly like. So the shelter environment, again, is stressful. We talked about that before. And the feline behavior guidelines from the American Association of Feline Practitioners wrote this guidelines in 2004 and have a list of harmful stressors to cats. Irregular and unpredictable feeding times, absence of stroking and petting and other positive interactions from humans, unpredictable and unfamiliar manipulations or handling, changes in the environment, lack of mental stimulation, anything that acutely startles the cat, such as a loud noise, and lack of choices or control over situations. So that was written for all cats. But boy, does that sound like the shelter, doesn't it? And so these are things that we know are stressful for cats, and they are part of the shelter environment. So again, shelter stress reduces welfare, it increases susceptibility to illness, and it increases the chance of the development of behavior problems. So what's stressful stimuli for a cat in a shelter? Really just about anything. So the transport to the shelter, unfamiliar people, other cats, barking dogs, strange smells, loud noises, it's all stressful to a cat. And what happens when a cat is frightened? Well, they get that surge of epinephrine. Okay, so this is the stress response, and that epinephrine readies them for flight or fight. And this happens every single time they are exposed to that stressful stimulus. And so, you know, if you think about when you're driving down your road and all of a sudden a car comes out and you put on your brakes, and you know how your heart's pumping and your palms are sweaty, you're like, I just almost got in an accident. And how you felt? Imagine that happening to you 5 times a day. Every time someone slams a cage door in the metal bank of cages you're living in. Okay? Or every time the loudspeaker comes on, or every time a dog barks that's in the room next door. And so this is stuff that happens to cats. And they don't always habituate. You think, oh, he'll habituate to it because he's going to be exposed to it. But he's too stressed to habituate to it, and it's going to happen every time that stressful event happens. This is going to happen. So factors that affect the stress response in individuals, again, just like with the dogs we talked about, genetics plays a role. Their personality plays a role. You know, are they a bold cat or are they a shy cat? Bold cats are probably going to do better in the shelter than a shy, fearful cat. And so their personality does play a role. Their level of socialization, again. Now with dogs, the critical period for socialization is 3 to 12 weeks, and with cats it's 3 to 7 weeks. And so, cats need to be handled by humans before they're 8 weeks old, or they're going to be afraid of humans. And so that's going to affect how they do in the shelter. Prior experience or exposure, the duration of the stressor. Is it an acute stressor or is it a chronic stressor? And of course, living in the shelter is a chronic stressor. But within that chronic stress, you have acute stressors happening all the time. The severity of the stressor will affect how well they cope with it. The predictability of the stressor is also important, because if they can predict it, then they're going to be able to cope with it better. But it's all these unpredictable things that happen randomly in the shelter that is stressful. And again, whether they perceive the stressor as escapable or inescapable. And if you're living in a little cage, most things are inescapable. So some signs of stress in cats. Some cats hide, stop eating, feign sleep. That's pretending to sleep, but you're not really asleep. Lethargy and depression, social withdrawal, lack of grooming, diarrhea, panting, salivation, hypervigilance, dilated pupils, piloerection, that's their hair standing up, twitching tail, vocalization, aggression, muscle tension, rapid ear carriage changes, escape attempts. These are just some signs of stress. Now, not all cats will show all of these, or maybe they'll only show one of these, but you need to learn to recognize when a cat is stressed. Is he lethargic and depressed and been laying around for days? Is he hypervigilant and worried about every little sound? Attempts to hide and just laying motionless in the litter box. This cat has huge dilated pupils and is drooling. He's a pretty stressed cat. This kitty is vocalizing and trying to escape, all things you've seen in the shelter. Unfortunately, the most common sign of stress in shelter cats is lack of behavior, because cats oftentimes withdraw when they're stressed. And so if you don't know what you're looking for, if you don't know what it looks like, or you're not paying attention, a cat that you think is comfortably sleeping might just be feigning sleep. And so you look harder and his eyes are open and he's hypervigilant, but he's all curled up and you think, oh, he's just sleeping. But these are the cats you got to identify, because maybe he hasn't left there in days. He hasn't eaten, he hasn't used the litter box. So generally speaking, cats are likely to be more stressed and afraid in the shelter environment, mainly because many cats have never left their home. So these, cats that come into the shelter, it's not like they don't go for walks every day. They don't go to the friend's house like dogs do. They live in a house and then they get surrendered to the shelter. Or the stray cats who've never been inside. Many cats have never seen, smelled, or heard another cat. And I'm talking mostly here those house cats that live with Aunt Sally, and now Aunt Sally's passed and her family brought the cat in. And the cat's only known Aunt Sally in that home. And the size of most of the cages in the shelter really make cats feel vulnerable and cornered. And so this really is way too small, yet this is the traditional shelter cat cage. Now, we're doing a lot better these days, but look at this cage, what this cat has. His litter box, his water and food take up one side, and he's got a towel on the other. He has no room to walk around, and his food is right next to his litter box. His litter box is so small he can hardly use it because he can't even get in it because it's so small. This is very, very stressful for this animal. So the cat feels cornered and vulnerable, and they're forced to sleep right next to their litter box or in their litter box. Now, if you're sleeping in your litter box because it's the only place you feel that you have any kind of cover, where are you going to go to the bathroom? So that's stressful. And so these kind of cages are just horrible for cats. Now, the adjustment period, how long does it take a cat to adjust to this environment? And that varies. It varies greatly and varies by individual. So again, some cats come in and they seem perfectly fine from day one. Some after a couple of days are doing better, and some never adjust to the environment. It's an individual thing. So let's look at some stress reduction for shelter cats. Hiding is the best coping mechanism cats have to deal with stress. The best. And when they can't hide, it prolongs the stress response. Every shelter I go into, I tell them every incoming cat should have a hiding box, because that gives them a chance to cope with this stress of this new place. And if they spend an hour in it and then come out, great. If they spend 2 days in it, great. Give them a box. I really, truly believe every incoming shelter cat needs a hiding box. A number of studies shown that if you give a cat a hiding box, it reduces their stress. Right? So it's very simple and it's very cheap to get boxes in for your cats. This isn't enough for this cat. He's desperately trying to hide, but he can't quite make it. Here's a cat trying to hide in his litter box. You see his eye? Okay, hypervigilant, dilated pupils, very stressed, trying to hide in his litter box with the ripped up paper. If you don't have any boxes on hand, this is easy enough to do. They probably have plenty of towels on hand. Day 1, day 2, day 3, that'll help the cat adjust to this environment. But give them a place to hide from the very moment they come into the shelter. Hiding boxes in their cages, even when they make it to the adoption floor. This is out at Lollipop, where some volunteer made these plexiglass hidey boxes so they can be sanitized, which is nice. If they don't have a box to hide in, they're going to try to hide somewhere. And that's when you come in and their whole cage is disturbed and they're under everything. You think, oh, I just made that pretty. Well, that cat needs something besides a pretty little cage. He needs a hiding box. So chronic stress versus acute stress. Again, it's much harder to identify chronic stress in a cat because they inhibit their behavior when they're chronically stressed, for the most part. Okay? And so they don't typically show these stereotypic behaviors that the dogs do. They're going to just withdraw and they're going to hide and be lethargic. So what I want you to do when you go back to your shelter, I want you to go back and I want you to walk through your shelter, think like a cat. Okay? I want you to identify the sources of stress in your cat areas. The sounds, the vibrations, the smells, the sights, the temperature. And really think, when I used to take the vet students over to Tompkins County every week, I gave them a piece of paper and that's what they had to do. I'm like, okay, here we're in the cat room. I want you to write down everything in this room that could be stressful to the cat. All right, and that's what I want you to do when you go back to your shelters. And when you go do this, remember that each cage experiences different things. So you're going to sit on the floor to experience what that bottom cage is experiencing, and you're going to get up on a ladder or a chair to experience what that top cat is experiencing. Okay, I want you to experience what these cats are seeing and feeling. So what does he see? What's at his level? The animal traffic at that level, the human traffic, the neighboring cats. What is he seeing? What does he smell? Right? Remember, they gather lots of information through their sense of smell. Are there animal smells? Of course there are animal smells because it's an animal shelter. Are there food smells? I mean, you opening cans of wet food in a room for the sick cats in a room with the other cats. The chemical smells. Remember, if we're not doing our right dilution on our bleach, 1 to 32, that smell of that bleach is not only an irritant to our eyes and our nasal passages, but you know, it's not healthy for us or the animals. What do they hear? So what are they hearing? Loud, sudden, chaotic noises. Especially do this in the morning cleaning routine. The radios are on, the hoses are going, there's vehicles, there's slamming doors, overhead pagers, there's people shouting and phones ringing and trash cans rolling around. It's really loud when you guys are cleaning those areas. So think about it and pay attention to it. What does he feel? So what kind of vibrations or air movements are in the room? Are there fans? Are there drafts from doors? Are there heating or air conditioning units blowing on, particular cages? There are radios on top of a cage. That's a bad picture. But remember I told you about the cat's sensitive foot pads? Well, they feel that vibration if you put that boom box up on top of that bank of metal cages. and that's stressful. If the cat doesn't get enough sleep, if they don't feel safe, they don't get enough sleep. The average cat sleeps a lot, and cats' natural sleep patterns are disruptive in the shelter environment. So I also want you to walk through at night. So again, as I was saying earlier, walk through at night and see where the security lamps or the exit lamps are shining. Because these might be shining on one particular cage and you never really thought about it because you just turn off the lights and go. And so look around at night as well. So again, cats spend a large portion of their day resting, and we want to provide them with comfortable surfaces, something like hammocks. I think I missed a slide here. A stuffed friend or cuddle up to can be very helpful. A high place to be. I'm sorry, I'm just a little disoriented because I'm missing some slides, so something happened. A high place to be. Cats feel much more secure when they're up high, and so if we want to provide them with a high place to be, that is a hide, perch, and go box. You guys, anybody use those? Okay, so they're great because the cat can hide in them, the cat can perch on top, and then the cat can go home in it, and it smells like that cat. So we're going to make some adjustments. Noise reduction. We're going to move the radio, turn the volume down, change the station. I can't tell you how many shelters I go into where the music's playing to keep the humans moving. But it's really raucous music that's irritating to the cats. And so changing the station, turning down the volume, asking the staff to be quieter, not slamming doors and yelling and things like that. Nighttime light reduction. And so again, if you have a particular cage that is the exit sign is shining in on, covering it up with a blanket or towel before you go home is really a nice thing to do for that cat. A box or a paper bag to hide in. Again, hiding is the best coping mechanism they have, or a perch to get up on top of. This bank of cages here, if you look closely, I don't know if you can see it in the picture, but the bottom cat is really stressed, and the top cat seemed okay. So we could move that bottom cat up to the top. Cats feel better when they're up high. I personally don't think we should have any cats along the floor like that. And so if you have cages on the floor, try to get them up off the floor, because that's real stressful for cats. But if you have this situation, and you can't help it, make sure you monitor that bottom cat, and if the bottom cat is stressed, you're going to move them up higher. Put someone a little more secure down on the bottom. Familiarity is really important to cats. Different caretakers every day can be really stressful. Being moved from cage to cage every day is stressful. Moving items that smell familiar from, removing all the items that smell familiar every day. And in the old days, that's what we did. And Dr. Weiss addressed this today too. That we used to clean everything out, and the cat got a brand new clean cage, new blanket, new everything every single day. But now we go to spot cleaning. The spot cleaning is the recommendation now to make sure that we don't take everything away from that cat that smells like them. They need the security of their scent. If you have to clean that entire cage, you want to provide something for the cat that you can keep with them. And so I like to recommend rubbing cloths. So let's say your policy at your shelter is we have to clean every day. Well, then go to Kmart or whatever and buy a whole bunch of washcloths, and you just hang that on the front of the cage, and it'll take up the scent of the cat. Cat will probably also rub on it with their facial glands, and then you can move that from cage to cage. And that shouldn't get soiled because it's hanging on the front of the cage. I like to do this anyway because it's a nice thing to take up their scent. You can also spray some feel away on that. But if you have to remove everything and bring the cat to a new cage, bring something with them that smells like them. So they have to be relocated. So back when I first started the MSPCA, it was clean this cage, move the cat in here. Then clean that cage and move the next one in here. And that's how it was done. And we know now that is not okay. Moving them to a different cage every day and having nothing that smells like them. Predictable schedules is also very important for cats. Okay, make sure you have predictable schedules for feeding time, play time, petting time, enrichment time, and even the chaotic time of cleaning. And so if, did I scare you? So if you guys just jumped, you know what a cat feels like when something acutely stressful happens. Now, if I did that randomly through my 4 talks, you would jump every time. But if I did that after every 5th slide, on the 4th slide, you would brace yourself, because you could predict it. That's what we talk about, predictable, chaotic time. So if the chaotic time is done roughly the same time every day, that really helps the cats adjust to that or habituate to it as best as they can. But I've been to shelters where they get to it when they get to it. And sometimes the cats are cleaned at 7 o'clock in the morning, and sometimes they're cleaned at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And that's just really not good for the cats. They really like and need routine. Feel Away is a synthetic facial pheromone from a cat that has a calming effect on most cats. Again, this is just like with dogs. This is an expensive product, and you want to ask for donations, but it can be really helpful in your shelter. I like to use the spray in the shelter, or if you have a small room, like an ISO room for sick cats, you can have a plug-in diffuser in there. But the Feel Away can be very helpful. Music. So soft, soothing music has a calming effect on all animals. I like to also think about putting playing the radio for the cats, and I like to play NPR, the station that has classical music and then human conversation. For one, when you play the music during the day, it does kind of drown out these sudden acute sounds that happen, because there's something going on all the time. And the other thing is, again, it keeps the cats habituated to human voices. And so NPR can be really nice, in addition to the Through a Dog's Ear CD that I talked about earlier. Human companionship, of course, with cats is also very important. Making sure that you pet the cats and give them some good cuddle time and play time is a good stress reliever. And they went out of their kennel or their cage. Get them out. I have been to shelters where cats are living in these tiny little cages, and they're in there for weeks to months without coming out. So my program of 4 on the Floor is a program where the cats get to come out at least twice a week for 10-15 minutes to stretch. You got to figure out where you can do it, but they need to get out of that cage and stretch around. Okay, so here's our list of stress reduction procedures for cats. Provide a hiding place, provide a high place, allow them familiar scent, maintain predictable schedules, help provide for normal sleep cycles, provide a comfortable place for them to rest, try some pheromone therapy, some soft music, some human companionship, and try to get them out of the cage whenever you can. Okay.